ready at all, but that's
Well, we're going to start anyway. Ladies and gentlemen and variations thereof, welcome to the Selectives Lorecast, a casual Elder Scrolls podcast. I didn't have a prompt, so nobody held up cards while they predict exactly what it is I'm going to say, because say the same thing every time, but nobody, yeah, exactly, like a YouTube video or something. And it wasn't YouTube, who cares? Anyway, my name is Rotten Deadite. Today we're talking about Sotha Sil. With me today are...
Nick.
Just Nick.
Just Nick.
Just Nick. Cool. I'm James, also known as Aramithius.
I'm Andrew, also known as the White Guar, and I love you all.
Aw, that's sweet. My name is Felix, also known as Banu Hana Masashi on Reddit and Discord.
This is Jonathan, also known as Sothis. No relation to the Sil.
And I'm TrainWiz. I don't do anything in particular.
Nobody knows who he is.
Literally nothing.
He said we pulled him in off the street. We're like,
you want to talk about Sotha Sil? And he answered us in binary, and we said, good enough. Hey, Nick, you know what they call a TrainWiz in France?
Le TrainWiz.
Le TrainWiz, yeah.
On.
Now you're making me miss Paris.
Yeah, why would anybody miss that city? God.
Because their artillery isn't zeroed in.
Oh, I knew it was going to be a joke. I knew it was going to be a military joke. I saw that one coming. Un whiz de la tran. Today we're talking about Sotha Sil, and we have to talk about Sotha Sil because the last time we talked about Sotha Sil, the Clockwork City wasn't out yet. And we did not, in our wildest dreams, imagine there would be so much dank lore about Sotha Sil and the Clockwork City in it. And then we got completely blown away. So there's gobs and gobs and gobs of new material, not just the truth and sequence, but also, as we have just discussed just seconds before we went live, there are Sotha Sil body pillows. So...
That's just Sotha Sin.
It's canon. It's canon now. Sotha Sil body pillows.
Yeah, it's actually canon now.
It's canon that he's like the most desirable tribunal. Like there's more than one character who mentions how handsome he is and how attracted to them they are.
It's just because he's tall.
Nobody says that shit about Vivek.
He's a literal daddy. He's the father of memory. Like, come on.
He's a literal daddy.
He's technically Vivek's dad. So...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I just told you, he's literally a daddy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Daddy then. All right.
So, let's see. Not too sure that we need to cover a whole lot from the previous episode, but we're going to just kind of sum it up. Sotha Sil is 1/3 of ALMSIVI, the gods of the Dunmer. He is an elusive and difficult to comprehend god. He spends most of his time, as we're led to understand, mucking around in a place called the Clockwork City, which he built or discovered or a little bit of both. And that works out well because he's also supposed to be the observer/mage of the Trinity, and that's, generally speaking, supposed to be a very difficult to understand role, so this works out well. Not that really any of ALMSIVI are easy to understand. I mean, Vivek is intentionally obtuse, and Amalexia seems to punish any attempt. So, So what do we? So I guess what I want to start off with is, here's what we knew about Sotha Sil before Clockwork City. So
I love how you can actually hear your clock.
Yeah,
that's my clock, by the way. I thought it'd be a nice touch to leave it up.
Your clock.
Yeah, it's mine.
Nice.
We don't actually know prior to the Clockwork City expansion, there wasn't a whole lot of official lore about Sotha Sil. There was plenty of unofficial lore, thanks very much to that guy TrainWiz down there.
You're welcome.
And frankly, it was really damn good. In fact, I would argue it was so damn good that a lot of people at ZeniMax Online Studios kind of might have borrowed a little bit of it.
I plead the fifth.
Yeah. For political reasons, we won't comment any further on that. But And the only other things that we had, Sotha Sil's last words. That wasn't, and we had
He
what
wasn't even really
Vivek
in
told us
Coda.
about him. I'm sorry.
He wasn't even really in Coda at all. We had like a little bit of memory, and that's it.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, and we knew what we knew about him from Morrowind. We knew what we knew about him from Tribunal. We knew about his tragic end. We knew a little bit about his relationship of being just very, very distant from the rest of the Tribunal, increasingly distant as time went on, to the point where Vivek and Alexia basically admitted that they rarely, if ever, saw him.
Yeah, and we also know that the Clockwork City itself, no one ever really knew where it was at any point.
Yeah.
So he was intentionally difficult to find, and yeah.
Which is interesting because they definitely do not say very many specific things about Clockwork City in Morrowind and Tribunal, and that's interesting because you are all over that place in the Clockwork City expansion in ESO.
Yep.
Now, generally speaking, in ESO, when somebody goes to the Clockwork City, they don't get back out again. I don't think I'm wrong about that, right?
Yeah,
No.
there's a series of conversations between a Halalu guy that kind of just ended up there randomly and one of the apostle guards, and he keeps trying to threaten her to get out, which is kind of funny because he is literally, you just walk up the stairs and there's the exit.
Yeah.
I guess because maybe because you're of prestige, or maybe because Sotha Sil dislikes you, or maybe because fears like hacking things behind the scene, you can leave freely.
Probably any combination of those. Yeah.
If you have an IQ higher than 100, if you've got that galaxy brain going on, Sotha Sil will kidnap you and force you to make Legos forever.
Yeah. And
good thing I like Legos.
Yeah. And
is that actually how he recruits Clockwork Apostles? Because how do people get there?
It's usually by accident is what it's kind of set up as, but it's providence. It's coincidence, and Sotha Sil sets things up. Like the big one, of course, is Luciana Polo is fighting. I think some Bosmer battle mage, because she's also she's a Remanera battle mage, and they clash in this huge explosion, and she wakes up in the Clockwork City in a tank filled with nanites.
Yeah, basically gets rebuilt. The Clockwork City, it's worth mentioning that the Clockwork City that we see in ESO is very, very sci-fi, or I should say sci-fantasy. It's like there's basically, thinly veiled references to nanites and cybertech, and
for God's sake, you literally see people cleaning walls with flamethrowers and the imperfect laser.
I mean, I've always viewed it, at least in my limited understanding, as kind of the Dwemer were steampunk, and Sotha Sil said, "Okay, that's nice, but I'm more of a cyberpunk kind of guy."
It's got those steampunk overtones, but there's a lot of key differences between his aesthetic and the Dwarven aesthetic. And from what he sees in Truth and Sequence, of course, he basically goes off on the Dwemer saying, "You guys are idiots. What the hell are you doing?"
Although that's Deldries, that's not Sotha Sil.
True. But I think he seems to kind of agree there in some ways.
Yeah, and it is worth mentioning that that is a very excellent point, that the Dwemer seem to be more steampunk. Wait a minute, isn't there a term for the clockwork art style?
Clockpunk.
Is it clockpunk or something?
What we kind of define it as is dwarves are steampunk art deco, and then Sotha Sil is kind of a Renaissance clockwork aesthetic going on.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And
kind of Da Vinci on steroids.
I wonder if there's any subtleties between sort of Victorian steampunk, which is sort of the default, and perhaps something more akin to diesel punk, where you had, World War II weapons and engines and great technological advancements, maybe. So still kind of in the same wheelhouse, but a bit different.
There's more magic to it, though.
Yeah.
Looking at James's background, you've got the little blue orb back there filled with some kind of liquid. it's
get out of the way, James. We can't see your background. Get out of the way.
Yeah.
The giant punch cards.
Yes, the gigantic
spin on a rack.
Because apparently that you can't make cloth or wood there isn't any cloth or wood, I should say, in the Clockwork City, so they make all of their books out of plates.
It's all scavenged from people who ended up there.
Yeah, and that is one of the things that they talk a lot about in the Clockwork City, which I'm really glad they do talk about it, which is the idea that there's just very little organic matter in that area. It's almost entirely brass and metal and steel and etc. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up to try to slam us into the metaphysics that we're supposed to be known for is why is it important that there's so little organic stuff in the Clockwork City?
Well, I think it relates back to the truth and sequence in that Sotha Sil very much kind of sees the normal world as it is, as imperfect and unordered and way too much data running around doing stuff. He does not like the day drive. I know truth and sequence is more of someone paraphrasing his stuff, but from both his dialogue, truth and sequence, and just his actual backstory,
he takes a dim look.
Pretty clear he's not a fan of that.
Although I kind of got the impression that that was kind of more of a synthesis. The end of Truth and Sequence feels more like it's trying to create a cyborg world, so to speak, rather than replace everything.
Well,
so
that's a really good word to use for it, a cyborg or augmented world, because that's kind of the idea behind Truth and Sotha Sil's endgame, which we've probably discussed at length on this channel before, but never specifically dedicated something to it. It is, as explained by someone else in the Truth and Sequence, is effectively a quest for a perfect Tamriel.
Which of
or is
course
it a perfect
means turning
Nern?
everything into robots and that.
Is it Nern or Tamriel he's trying to fix?
Like fucking Dr.
Dude.
Eggman here.
Yeah, I was just gonna say
Tamriel.
he's Robotnik.
He's
Exactly.
It's
God, I'm never gonna unsee that now. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
especially Jim Carrey as Dr. Robotnik. But
yeah. But it is, but the reason why this is worth noting is because this differs from Vivek's plan to escape the Kalpic cycle altogether. But Sotha Sil doesn't appear to have much of an issue with it. He just, like in fact, there is a parallel that you can draw between, I can't believe I'm going to say this, Sotha Sil and the Thalmor, which is that they both see a flaw in the mortal realm. But while the Thalmor want to destroy it altogether and go right back to Aetherius and being gods again, Sotha Sil wants to perfect it. It's just not entirely certain what, from Truth and Sequence, I can't really draw a definitive conclusion about what that would look like.
So nameless. So basically, it's very Anuic. Everything is one.
Hence Clockwork, by the way. And to my original point, that's why there's so little organic stuff in the Clockwork City. It's got to be Clockwork because Clockwork is, ideally speaking, perfect. And once you develop the perfect mechanism, it cannot be, the perfect mechanism cannot exist with organic matter. So you can't have age and decay and gooey, fleshy stuffs. So,
do you think it's a coincidence that Aldmeris was described as an endless city?
Oh, okay. I have a few thoughts on this, but I want to hear TrainWiz first. So,
well, let's see. We're talking about Sotha Sil. I actually want to talk a lot about the whole Anuic relation and Jyggalag relation, and a lot of this concept of Anu as a technology god or a technology concept. Because I think, first off, we're talking about the whole Clockwork thing. I don't know if you guys ever ran through Halls of Fabrication. I don't blame you if you didn't, because it's a hard as shit dungeon.
It really is.
But
You
it
should do it
does
once.
say that basically the Halls of Fabrication can basically turn anything into clockwork. They can replicate anything in terms of clockwork. But the actual most interesting contraband item you can get in the Clockwork City is a statue of Jyggalag and Sotha Sil kind of as one. It's a heretical aspect of Sotha Sil worship like Jyggalag. And that's really interesting to me because
order, right?
Besides the fact that in Truth and Sequence, Sotha Sil goes, all Daedras suck except Jyggalag, he's kind of okay. But there's a lot of parallels between them in the need for order, the fact that their worlds are both kind of like dead and don't really have a lot of organic life. I'm pretty sure there's some concept art where Jyggalag was going to actually have like clockwork robotic soldiers. But it's also the fact that both Sotha Sil and Jyggalag kind of knew everything entirely through logical and mathematical deduction. You talk to his librarian, and he says that we had a giant library that had filled with every action anyone could ever take entirely through logic. And that's Sotha Sil basically has something in the same way. And those are both heavily Anuic characters, which kind of makes sense to me because we talk about, Padomay is change and Anu is stasis. But I think a more interesting foil to each other is that Anu is more of a god of unity and collectivism, whereas Padomay is more of the god of ego individualism.
Yeah, individualism.
And that kind of links to, on a wider level, Anu seems to be related to more towards industry and civilization. And you can see that in a lot of the Anuic civilizations, like the Aldmer, the Dwarves, and obviously Sotha Sil, highly Anuic. And then, we've got trains and enslaved Daedric power lines and all that stuff. Whereas in most Padomaic civilization, the Argonians are basically like, if a giant worm knocks over my town and eats my wife, that's okay. I'm not going to rebuild it. That's the will of Sithis. Let's go play some balls.
Well, it's interesting that, one thing I do want to point out is that it might, it depends on your personal perspective of how Anu and Padomay play out their responsibilities in the metaphysics of the Elder Scrolls universe. A really, really Asian sort of Taoist perspective on the two would suggest that Anu and Padomay are almost indistinguishable from each other from a mortal standpoint, in that neither one of them produces anything or gets anything done. Both of them encompass everything, but in a different way, and above and beyond all of that, neither one of them are compatible with each other. When
are you calling my Yokudans Taoist?
A little bit. So when you, am I suggesting that Redguard lore is Asian inspired? Where would you get that idea from? So when you then go down a gradient into Anuiel and Lorcan, or Anuiel and Sithis, or wherever you want to put them, I think it's a little bit easier to start assigning them a humanistic traits, like TrainWiz suggested, the idea of order versus chaos, collectivism versus individualism, that sort of thing. The only reason why I point that out is because it's sometimes easier to work through Elder Scrolls metaphysics if you start considering Anu and Padomay as extremely abstract entities. Because when you're dealing with that level of gradiency in metaphysics, it's in other metaphysical practices, it's easier to find parallels. It's easier to start plugging things in. But once you start, once I start assigning more humanistic traits to them, my eyes go cross-eyed and I can't. It gets really hard.
Well, sorry, I missed the last 30 seconds of that because of the phone interruption. So what did you say, Chris?
Don't worry about it. So, so that's one of the things that we get from Clockwork City is the from the Clockwork City expansion is the idea of Sotha Sil having a goal for the mortal realm, Mundus or Tamriel, or like I said, I think Mundus. Is it Tamriel? Okay, all right.
Yeah, it's called Tamriel Final.
That's right. That's right. I remember. Thank you. So,
but it's also Nern ensuing. So yeah.
Tamriel released candidate build 1.
Well,
yeah, right. It's the Tamriel beta. Yeah, the closed beta.
Mortal realm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the mortal realm denotes Mundus, but then again, if you take the Kirkbridean approach, that means that it's Tamriel actual, and then you've got the a prehistory of Yokudan, and you've got the impossible to reach future of Akavir. Thank you.
Yeah.
Whew, wow, that took a minute.
How long have you been doing this?
Too long.
Yeah, and you've got those two on either end, and so the only one that's actually worth, working on or manipulating or whatever, what you would consider to be the mortal realm, the place where mortals can exist, would be Tamriel actual.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say it's not Mundus, because Mundus would include the Aedra, and he like the Aedra.
Yeah, but he wants to fix the Etarda gears.
Yeah.
He wants to say that they're broken. Let's take them to bits, put them back in their proper places, make sure they all work together as one machine.
Take a hammer and fix the godhead.
Yeah. Just get in. Just friggin' get in there with a screwdriver, bro. Yeah.
Yeah. Although
okay.
I think that would actually involve getting rid of a good chunk of the entire Arabis if we're going to go that far, because he kind of rejects or at least if we take the truth in sequence as possible, as an accurate reflection of what Sotha Sil's trying to do, which I know is a dangerous leap, but let's bear with me. There's this line of, in the glorious Nern ensuing, we must exorcise that grinning apparition we call I. And if you're changing the I into something else, you are mucking around with the tower. You are redefining the entire wheel. You are going back to the first brush of Eye of Padomay and making it something else.
Yeah, he's looking to fill in the gaps. He doesn't want a wheel. He wants a gear. There's no holes.
Okay, hang on. I have a lot of things to try and get in here because everyone's been doing stuff and I've been taking notes. I'm glad James brought up the point of gears and trying to change things, because in each of their own ways, each part of the tribunal is trying to shape the world or how they are perceived in the world in their own way. Almalexia has her vision. Vivek's vision is to escape it. He wants to transcend the cycle. Sotha Sil's is to perfect it. And this goes back to the whole why there's a lack of organic matter in the Clockwork City and everything. While that's true, we also have to remember, at least functionally speaking, that gears decay. They rust, they seize. You need some oil, you need tools and outside intervention, as it were, to kind of fix things, replace things, inspect, maintain, and everything. Which is part of why Sotha Sil's kind of tragic in that he's trying to do all this, but he's still one man, even though he is a god. James also asked why Aldmeris is an endless city. I would like to go back to that at some point because we never really answered that, I don't think. But again, the whole purpose of Clockwork, and I think it was you, Chris, who said something at the very beginning about whether the Clockwork City was found or built from scratch. If we want to talk about the dreaded C word, coda, one could reasonably assume that the Clockwork City was built out of Sotha Sil finding the gears of the world beneath the surface of Nern and saying, oh, cool, let me play around with this for a couple millennia. So that could be a potential reason for why that happened. I'm just saying it's a possibility. It's a big old maybe.
Are you saying that the Clockwork City is possibly a reconstructed Aldmeris?
No, I'm saying that
we're talking about we're going back to the Wheels of Lol, basically. Magnus's original designs, and I think as it stands, the Clockwork City's effect, which is kind of like rewriting reality and changing Nern and Tamriel as to how he wants it to be, that was kind of him discovering things. But the Clockwork City, the realm itself, that's his own original creation. If we take what I can't even remember his name. Guy before Lemon Turtle.
Lawrence Schick.
Lawrence Schick. His comments about the Clockwork City is that it's basically at the exact center of Nern, both physically and metaphysically. So basically, Sotha Sil had some giant metaphysical drilled down in the center of the earth and placed a giant bubble there. That's his Clockwork City. And from there, he starts working on rebuilding everything.
Is that also how he's the father of memory then? Because if he's at the center of it and I can't really formulate this because Sotha Sil is probably my weakest part of the tribunal, but I feel like there's some connection there between putting his Clockwork City, his seed as it were, in the center of Nern, both physically and metaphysically, has something to do with his connection as the father of memory.
Well, do you know where? Okay, so if you interpret the Wheels of Lol as being the memory of the way Magnus intended Nern to work, and you extend from that the idea that Nern is not working the way Magnus intended it to, which is probably
true,
a safe assumption. Then
it was pretty much Lorecast gave him the plans and then sprung a trap. Hey, the thing you're building is actually not the thing you're actually building.
Surprise! So I've used SQL code injection, and now you're now your site doesn't do what it used to.
Thing that exists.
I mean, my thought is that I mean, because based on, so I put a link in the Twitch chat here. It's where Kirkbride got the name Lol from. He was a mathematician who tried to use like math and clockwork to understand the workings of God. And so with that kind of connection, I think about, I mean, I feel like that the gears that were under Nern were already there, and that it's see, and I tend to take things a little more metaphorical. I think it has more to do with the mechanics of the mind of the dreamer. It is the source code in you know a manner of speaking. And so that means that the Clockwork City is really kind of getting to I mean the source code of the dream. This is from here we can alter anything. You know, the what is it he calls it, the prime axle or something like that. So someone remind me.
Well, I specifics aside, I think you're dead on accurate. I think what we're looking at with the Clockwork City is if it's not a patch to the mechanics that make up Nern or Mundus in general, it's a fork. It's a divergent build.
I would go possibly a bit more metaphysical with that, or a bit more towards the magic angle, and just say that if just from the ways that we're talking about it, it's almost like the Clockwork City and White Gold Tower have similar ends in mind. That they're both built to manipulate Mundus. That you change one, and you change a thing in the Clockwork City, and the end goal is to change something in Mundus into a sympathetic relation. The Clockwork City is the ultimate sympathetic mega fetish. There's also that note in 2920, which I know is a novel, but it's a cool idea, that when the era changes, something goes clunk in the Clockwork City and a whole bunch of things start changing, because it both responds to and affects how Mundus how Mundus functions. That it's used as something to try and tweak it. That it's the axle, and it's the drive shaft as well. So you manipulate the drive shaft, you manipulate the vehicle.
And that's kind of what I was trying to drive at. Because I mean, I like to kind of preach this idea of the entirety of the Elder Scrolls as a metaphor for the workings of the sleeping mind, right? And so, you know, we've got entire races. Well, these are, you know, ideologies. These are paradigms that you can have. And then, you know, individual people are like thoughts. They're fleeting. Some of them turn into something more, for example, like Talos. And so then when we get to like the Clockwork City, I mean, it's really getting to the underlying code, the mechanics of how all that works. And so it was omni-axle. That was what I was trying to think of. And the Clockwork City is referred to and in the Truth of Sequence as the omni-axle. And so like you said, the drive shaft, that's kind of the main pillar that holds kind of everything together, that everything revolves around. I mean, and if we think of that in terms of the wheel cosmology, we've got the tower, and so the tower and the omni-axle could be the same thing. And all of it is kind of playing with the underpinnings of, you know, how the mind works and how it's dealing with whatever it's dealing with as the dreamer is asleep. And so I mean, when we see a description of it in Coda, and here we've got all this obscure mathematics and you know, there's eyeballs in the gears and such. I mean, that in and of itself is, you know, even more metaphor for that underlying process. And now it's broken and bare, and now we have, you know, kind of the mind that's you know, just open. Here it is. Here's, you know, we can poke and prod at it, and who knows what's going to happen, you know, like brain surgery kind of thing. You know.
That's how brain surgery goes. You just open his head up and like poke things and see what happens.
Pretty much. I mean, oh yeah, no. I mean, we were talking about the Victorian era, right? Like, I mean, they did that with corpses and stuff. They pull open a body, use electrodes, and poke the brain, and then the corpse makes a face. They're like, whoa!
Right, that
modern day necromancy. So I don't have it here in my admittedly limited notes for the cast today, but is there a mention anywhere, because James said that it's mentioned that when the era changes, something goes clunk in the Clockwork City and things start to change. Is there ever a mention of what happens in the Clockwork City during a dragon break?
Ooh, I imagine panic.
Well, what's that thing where I don't remember if it was an official writing or something OOG. I think it was official. Where Sotha Sil is looking at this machine and like a band slips and suddenly one small mistake.
That's 2920. That's where the era, the new era starts.
Yeah,
and he's
that's
like,
that's what I was referring to.
Yeah. So I mean, I kind of imagine a dragon break operating kind of like that. It's a hiccup in the machine, and then all of a sudden the whole thing shuts down. And
well, if we're gonna talk about dragon breaks, we obviously have to talk about Coda, where time kind of ceases to be because Akatosh gets fired from his job. And we have the alternate system of timekeeping, which I'm pretty sure is implied to be put in place by Sotha Sil. What we always had in Sotha Sil Expanded in Wheels of Wool is that the Clockwork City kind of operates separately in terms of time and stuff. It doesn't really follow the same laws of decay. We even there was a giant still pendulum that never swings because to symbolically represent that Akatosh basically has no dominion there, and Sotha Sil is the guy keeping time. So I was always under the impression, both from Coda, various other stuff, and then just several implied things in Clockwork City in terms of like timekeeping mechanisms, that Sotha Sil kind of operates, that the Clockwork City and the god operate independently of Akatosh. So a dragon break doesn't really matter too much to him. Though it probably, given that the Clockwork City does observe and react to Nern, some stuff probably does go crazy ass haywire.
Like a certain gear suddenly stops working and it needs to be removed, kind of thing.
Something. Yeah.
I was thinking instead of teleporting in Revenera Soldier, it starts teleporting in like Terminators and jetpacks and stuff. It's like,
dun.
Come with me if you want to live.
Yeah.
There's also
as we know, the only thing that actually gets Sotha Sil out of his little man cave is Clockwork Cats.
That's true.
There's also something that kind of that makes me think that if Sotha Sil gets his way and Tamriel final happens, then it's almost dragon breaks would be functionally impossible because everything is all whirring. It's all a solid math anyway. You would. It's interesting that someone brought up the hurling disc earlier. But it talks about a fully well-oiled machine and just everything just hums along and it's all kind of beautiful and all working anyway. It's kind of many parts and one all together. So you've got a hurling disc that is a disc that still carries on, a disc that is a watch face maybe. And so you can also wind up having both time and not time all at once, and that's all okay. That's how it's meant to work, and it will carry on forever.
Which isn't that basically how the dawn works anyway?
Yeah. Best of my knowledge, it's kind of how the untime thing, the whole thing is supposed to work. It's fifth dimensional, I think, or something. It's
well, time is no longer relevant. I mean, yes, we experience time passing, but it doesn't. It's not really passing the way it should be. Or it's no longer.
There is time because there is Akatosh, but it's time almost without consequence because nothing lasts.
Yeah. I mean, it's like Akatosh having a seizure or something.
Well, so just like a side note before we get onto other things involving Sotha Sil and the Clockwork City, does this mean that the reason why we don't see Sotha Sil in Coda is because he's still down there on Clockwork Nerds like, come on, I can do this.
Kurt Bryant's comments and stuff. Sotha Sil, he's gone. Wherever he is, if he's not dead, he's fucked off somewhere to like maybe look at like a really interesting gear or something.
Yeah.
Memory is the one in control of the Clockwork City.
He got a new gig as the host of Antiques Roadshow.
That's there we go.
I thought you said he got a new game. I'm like, yes, he's literally down in the basement with a new Switch.
Yeah.
No, that's not what I meant, but that's also fun.
Going back to what we were talking about earlier before we can keep going, and I completely lose this thought. We were talking about how the Clockwork City influences Tamriel through like effectively an alchemical process of, as above, so below. What the hell happens when the Clockwork City floods, and what does that mean for, or just as the Clockwork City degrades, what does that mean for Tamriel?
Well, I think that goes back to the concept of Anu as the civilization and industry god, and also, of course, at this point, it's pretty much confirmed with Somerset that Tamriel is very much a regressive society. We're going away from the stronger magics and the technologies. And so as we get to Skyrim, which is, backwater shithole as it stands, and the Clockwork City is also degrading and everything, all the magic is going away. I think that kind of parallels Tamriel as a whole. So the Clockwork City, it's kind of like, how in Lord of the Rings there's like one or two elven strongholds of magic left. We've got like Lothlorien and whatever the fuck still exists.
It's a G word, isn't it? Something, yeah.
Is Rivendell like that? I thought it was.
No, yeah, Rivendell. Yeah, no, you're right. Lothlorien and Rivendell.
But as the once the ring is destroyed, those last bastions of high society finally start to die over centuries, and that's the same case with the Clockwork City. It was kind of the last Anuic bastion, as it were. There's no more dwarves. The Aldmer are now mucking around and shit like everyone else. And obviously, the Clockwork City is kind of falling to pieces because Sotha Sil is no longer there to occasionally patch the out-of-control cats.
Yeah. If you then take everybody might, or many people might remember Lady Nerevar's parabolic Kalpa idea.
Yeah.
So if Bethesda embraces a concept like this, which they don't have to, we might see something in the next Elder Scrolls game that reflects the curve up. What she was speculating was that the like Morrowind to Oblivion to Skyrim are in the bottom end of the bell curve, and then as the games continue, as we approach the end of the Kalpa, the magic, the level of magic should return back up to where it was in the Dawn, to where it started in the Dawn era. But now that we've kind of fucked up the whole Kalpa system altogether, then for all we know, it's just going to keep going and going and going until it begins increasing exponentially, and then reality doesn't make sense in general. And right around the 9th era, the reason why there's no 10th era is because it doesn't apply, eras don't apply anymore, and everything's just a great big fucking acid trip. But
I tend to take the opinion that this Kalpa was screwed up from the start anyway, because it's because both the Anuad and the Red God creation myths say that this one is different from everything that's come before.
Right.
So it's smashed together from all sorts of other stuff.
Sorry, James.
Yeah. But yeah, both the Anuad and the Red God creation myths say that it's formed out of the debris of previous worlds, rather than being something, rather than being a continuation of those worlds in the next cycle. Which could also actually explain the whole perspective of the Etarda gears, that if we look back at previous Kalpas when the cycle was actually functioning properly, would everything have looked incredibly different because everything knew their place, as it were. Everything would have been a lot more coherent, and you wouldn't need a Clockwork City to fix everything.
Yeah, Doc is pointing out in chat a very good point, which is that this Kalpa is the first one that Talos shows up in. So
yeah, there's some. Speaking of chat and stuff, we've got someone asked, "What in Somerset confirmed that Tamriel is regressing away from the magic stuff?" In the Sigic Order quest line, you talk to one of these guys, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's like, we can't do some of the bigger magics anymore because Tamriel is slowly losing some of its dawn magics. They pretty much outright, they don't imply, they pretty much outright say, yeah, magic is going away. And then the other ones, someone said, Memory, aka the Clockmaker's daughter, is Ios after to absorb the memory Sotha Sil uploaded in the Clockwork City. I don't like that. That's a little weird, just because Ios is also Sotha Sil's sister.
Yeah, it's his sister.
Yes. That the Fabricants are sort of, they use her voice, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
No.
Which
So
is kind of
yeah.
creepy, but whatever.
Totems and fabricants are two different things. The totems are straight up robots, and those aren't just using her voice; they're directly controlled by her. There's lines in Clockwork City when you query data or have to do something that she is a system running all of them. So she's the main AI. There are other AIs, of course. If again, there's enough of us and you all play ESO, we should run through the halls of fabrication sometime because the Assembly General there is also another AI.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, have you done
yes.
The other trial.
I have literally every single piece of Sotha Sil content.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the other Clockwork City trial, the Sanctum Sanctorum.
The Asylum Sanctorum, where all the saint souls into giant robot dragons because why?
I don't know.
Why would you not? Why not?
Well, what?
It's like I want to see how these people react to becoming AI and stuff. So I'm going to put them in a giant clockwork dragon that shoots lasers. That's a good idea.
Sure.
I suspect that was just a project that got way the hell out of hand.
Well, there's dialogue at the beginning that explains why they did it, and.
Is there a good reason?
There's a throwaway line to one of the clockwork mounts you can get, which is supposed to be that they were actually meant to be paraded around the cities and stuff. So they were meant to look big and glorious and cool.
So the what's her name? The alienist laundress. She says there were no people closer to the living gods as the saints, but those mortal connections would inevitably drift away with the current of time. Sotha Sil pondered this and designed his confidants a kind of immortality. Thus, the experiment began. So then they start going crazy.
I'm not questioning why he put the saints in robots. I was more questioning why he felt the need to put them in giant, destructive super robots.
Okay.
Instead of just like, there's obviously the other quest where you upload what's his face into a robot. It's like, why can't you just put him in a normal factotum?
Yeah,
because they don't deserve
better.
Because quest.
Well,
science.
Because
we have a raid and we need an encounter.
well, to be a little bit more serious, think about it like this: would you, if the living saints were kind of the best friends of the tribunal, would you want your best friend in a budget body?
Well,
or something.
I don't trust my friend in a giant dragon.
Well, looking at more of the dialogue here, she implies that because their souls were bound into pristine black soul gems, and he had to create machines that could harness their power. So she implies that either just the souls of the saints, or combined with these perfect black soul gems, they needed to be a little more robust. She says the experiment seemed a success, but while body and soul remained whole, the mind fractured. So they went crazy because their mind is supposed to be an organic mind, and it
ain't.
Which is arguably one of the almost tragic things about Sotha Sil is he's trying to make everything perfect. He's trying to be all Inuic about this stuff, but the overwhelming narrative that we've seen, and we've even touched on this throughout this cast, is that change is inevitable and always finds a way. The Yokudins were trapped on the skin ball, and Tall Papa says, well, sucks to be you. And they said, all right, well, you know what? We're going to figure out some new shit. And they learned how to sail to different worlds.
Katana.
Not a walking one. We see in Skyrim, as Chris pointed out, the pretty much trashing of the Kalpic cycle because, well, shit, what if we just broke everything? Would that somehow fix this thing? Oh, it kind of does. Like, change is always inevitable in some fashion. Hell, we got a literal avatar of Akatosh in Oblivion to make the biggest change possible in order to return to a kind of previous stasis. But there was also a huge ass change. So it's always going to find a way. So Sotha Sil is kind of this tragic guy, almost giving into insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. He's trying to perfect everything because, it's just around the corner. If I just tweak this and unlock the mysteries of the universe, it'll all come together and I'll achieve enlightenment and everything will be perfect the way it should be.
Well,
And then some idiot's going to come along and say, what if I did this? And the whole thing is going to come crashing down.
He'll develop
Really
the perfect piece of software, and then he'll turn it over for UAT, and then some user's going to be like, well, what if I turn around and walk away from the quest goal? And then you crash the desktop, and Sotha's like, what the finger fucking crap was that?
Yeah, well, I think the real tragedy of Sotha Sil is that we talk about how he's trying to make everything perfect, and he fucks up things constantly, and he is aware that he does that. The thing about Sotha Sil is he is an absolute fatalist, but it's hard to argue with him because he also knows everything. He knows what's going to happen, and he doesn't have really the ego or the individuality to try and change it.
I'm not sure that you can say that he definitely does know everything, but because the way that I got his dialogue on that was that he says that everything is inevitable, everything has causal chains and so on. But but going off chaos theory, then you can say, well, yes, that's true, but you can't have perfect knowledge of the initial conditions to make that the case. I think that's more what
I wouldn't say he certainly knows almost everything, but I think it's more the fact that he's absolutely certain about everything. And unfortunately, most of everything what he says comes true. I mean, he knew he was going to die. He knows Numidium's coming back on a lower level. He knew Luciana Polo's role in everything and allowed her son to die, even though he and her son were best buds, and her son was a brilliant alchemist and stuff. So it's definitely, like I said, people are always really mad at him because it's like, oh, he allows he says he loves people and wants to make a perfect world, but he allows people to languish as the tarnish, and it's like, again, he kind of knows this will happen. He's not going to change anything because it's all about inevitability. And I always thought that was the guy who we always characterize him in Wheels of Woe and Sotha Sil Expanded as the guy who A, knows everything but is unwilling to change things, and B, is kind of more obsessed with the experiment rather than the purpose of the experiment.
Yeah.
Which is, of course, reflects on why he's trying to fix Nirn, and he doesn't really seem to understand that Nirn is it has these issues for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and it just adds to his tragedy in that regard, and it's also probably, anyway, I'm assuming, a big part of why he does become more withdrawn as time goes on, because he can see all this stuff happening, so it's just, fuck it, man, nothing matters. Just,
he's getting burnt out.
Just leave me and my gears in peace.
I think we actually see the beginning of that. We see the beginning of that exact thought in his dialogue in ESO. Like when you're talking to him about the prisoner, he's like, he explains what the prisoner is, and you're like, oh, well, then that sounds like what you do. And he's like, nope, I can't do it. I've tried.
Yeah.
Shit.
He's tried, though. See,
he's tried.
And then he calls you clever for your trouble.
Yeah.
That's actually something that. Sorry, I just want to bring that back to some of the things that Felix said, because you're talking about the impossible things happening, like Akatosh causing change and all this, that, and the other. That immediately makes me think of Siege, and I know that the Order and the Endeavor aren't necessarily the same thing and all that good stuff, but if we're thinking of Siege and its various derivatives as an expression of Anu doing something and just a reaction to that, does that mean that Sotha Sil's reaction against the Order is part of what's compelling him to do everything? That he kind of realized the kind of underlying truth of what was happening with the Order, thought, oh no, I don't like this, I've got to stop it.
Well, I think I have a little bit of a philosophical point to make here that might explain, possibly, depending on if you buy it or not, the Sotha Sil's motivation, which is Felix is right that there's a sense of inevitable chaos that happens in the Elder Scrolls universe, and it's one of the things that Vivek's lessons sort of embraces, is the idea of life sucks, get a fucking helmet. It's this
life sucks, go kill the moon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Take your axe, go get it.
Do crime.
Take your axe. And it's an idea that Vivek is basically saying if Vivek embraces Tamriel or the arena as it's like the Dark Souls of reality. It's basically it's a really hard place to live. You need to get good. And the reason why everything is as rough as it is, this is actually a very Buddhist approach to reality, believe it or not, is the reason why good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people is because that's just the way shit goes. And if you can either sit around and whine about it, or you can get good. And the sort of the actual process of enlightenment from a Buddhist standpoint is very much like, or I should say, the idea of escaping reincarnation is very much like somebody saying, listen, I've gotten as good as I can at Dark Souls, so I've realized that the only way to stop letting this game kick my ass is to just stop playing it. And that's sort of the Buddhist idea of enlightenment is a little bit like the rejection of reality, leaving the Kalpic cycle altogether, of just saying, you know what, I'm just not doing this shit anymore, and I've figured out how to leave, so I'm going to go and do that. And one of the reasons why the Buddha is considered to be such a remarkable person is because he could stop reincarnating, and yet he continues to do so he can teach other people. Which is the salient point of the Buddha. The difference between what Sotha Sil is saying is that, and this is finally, I'm getting around to my point here. What I'm suggesting Sotha Sil might be saying is, we're never going to be able to fix Tamriel, or I should say Anu Vanasi, the perfect Tamriel, the new Tamriel, is, and peripherally, I think Sotha Sil understands that is not an attainable goal, but it's critical to the Enterprise that he continues to approach it as an attainable goal, even though he knows in the back of his head that it's not possible. If he's going to do what he is compelled to do, and again, I'm going to get very Vivek on you, if he continues to do love under will, if he continues to follow the divine destiny that he has realized he is responsible for, then he has to continue pounding his head against that brick, and failing over and over and over again, and possibly, and very, very well, may never attain what he's trying to attain. And we can see in Coda that he doesn't. But he's going to try and do it anyway, because this is, in a way, you could say, this is the only thing he can do. And
I would argue, actually, that we're talking about how he's unaware that he's aware that he'll never be able to actually attain the thing he wants, which is true. But I think part of his reason for eventually becoming more and more secluded is also because in his final speeches in Clockwork City, he talks about how, it's got a noble goal, this Clockwork City is going to solve everything. But then he also talks how it's built on a mountain of atrocities, and he keeps doing these horrible things in order to attain that goal. Mm-hmm. And I think as time goes on, because we kind of see that Sotha Sil, people like to say, oh, he claims to care, but he does care in a lot of ways. He wept over Luciana Polo's son's death, for God's sakes. I think it's as these atrocities pile up, it kind of erodes a lot of his sanity and will, and that's why he becomes more and more secluded. Not just because of the inevitability of it being unattainable, but because of just all these bad things he's done are finally catching up to him emotionally.
Right.
So he sits in his dome and cries.
Well, he was already fairly guilty about Nerevar from the get-go.
Yeah.
So.
But like I said, he says it's a mountain of corpses, and that mountain gets taller and taller. The corpse pile doesn't stop from getting bigger.
Yeah, but one thing that I would sort of add to that, or specifically to add to what Chris was saying, is that it's kind of like that saying, or there's a few sayings that sort of say the same thing in societies around the world, which is that it's not the destiny that's important, it's the journey to get there.
Right.
Or something along those lines. There's, variations.
Before destination, Radiant.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, my point is that even though Sotha Sil knows that in some way that he's not going to attain that, because he's probably seen his death and what happens afterwards, but the pursuit is what matters, because to him, he might realize that that will impact someone else who does something that then gets to the end goal, maybe. Because everything's a great big maybe in Elder Scrolls sometimes, which is part of why I love it, part of why I hate it. But I feel that that's probably what keeps them going, as opposed to just it's the only thing I can do. It's also that this is what needs to be done. Like, I need to go on this journey so that the people or things that happen along the way can also continue their journeys and impact Tamriel, Nirn, the Daedra, the Aedra, whatever it may be. Is kind of how I would choose to interpret that as in a more positive light, I guess you could say, so it's not completely depressing.
Well, you know, the Elder Scrolls universe is very fatalistic. It's depending on which writer you talk to, I should say, it's a very fatalistic universe. Not just because, I mean, as Kirkbride and Kuhlman like to say, that it's a universe in which the elves win instead of the Tolkien thing.
It's the story of the fall of man.
Right. Yeah. And that's that's something that they're really almost definitely not going to do in the games. Because it's going to be really hard to sell. But it is one of the reasons why Coda was so moving to me is because it was the best possible scenario considering the way the universe had been set up, you know. But yeah, I mean, I think that pretty much sums me up.
It's kind of funny how we've been talking a lot about ESO's lore for it, but we completely ignore all the stuff from Elder Scrolls Legends beyond the fact that the city's falling apart.
Well, yeah,
because
usually
the game fell apart as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's usually IFW's realm. He's way better versed in Legends. But what do you know about it?
Well, I think the only really big one in Legends is the fact that he somehow was able to make a new Heart of Lorecast.
Oh, that's right. I forgot completely. Yes.
The Clockwork Heart, yeah. And it's like, where the fuck did that come from? And the idea behind the actual heart, the Clockwork Heart, is that it's not literally a new Heart of Lorecast that you could draw on it for power. It's more he took the last bit of his divine spark and used it basically to make a perpetual motion generator.
Right.
Which is what you can use it to become divine, but only for so long, and then you burn up, or you can use it to power the city forever.
Yeah.
But if you try, like I said, if you remove that spark, it burns up pretty fast.
Yeah, which I mean, there's a bit in ESO where it he's experimenting with a false sun, and so I wonder if those two are related.
There is the false sun in there's a lot of interesting stuff in ESO, like the concept that you literally can't get things that live and grow without Magnus, the actual sun.
Yeah.
His false sun doesn't actually grow things. They have to extract life energy from people.
Yeah.
We had the fake sun in Clockwork City. What's the other thing? I thought you were actually going to refer to the Sunarav, the staffing eggs that can extract divine energy from things.
Yeah. Because he's
always been
divine energy. Yeah.
He's always been playing with divine energy as an alternative power source since all the lobbyists are shooting down his idea for nuclear fusion.
What was the thing there's a big crystal thing at the end of the ESO Clockwork City plotline?
Which one?
His VR headset thing?
Was that it? I can't remember. I have a screenshot of it and I forgot what it was.
There's the Throne line, which they imply can actively change Tamriel and do a bunch of stuff that he sits on all day. That's his VR helmet. There's Ios, which is the Master Factotum.
That's something else.
Yeah, maybe that was it. Might have been Ios. Yeah.
He doesn't really have a lot of big artifacts and stuff. He mostly, even like in Legends, like the card art, Vivek is wielding Muatra and Almalexia is wielding Hope's Fire, and Sotha Sil just has like 5 imperfects behind them all. I know we're gonna fuck you up.
About to drop the hottest album in Tamriel history. Yeah.
I would argue that Sotha Sil actually has the largest artifact of all, and it's the Clockwork City. So
yeah.
It's also very, very small. It's like it's like a basketball.
Which was one of the things that I liked the most about the very intro to Clockwork City was fantastic. It was saying, hey, here's an entire dimension, and it's about y'all big, and
which is actually not true. So a lot of people get pissy about the whole fact that it's a little bauble. For one thing, that references Sotha Sil's last words, where he said that it was in a jar on Alexia's mantle.
Mm-hmm.
But that is confirmed not to actually be the Clockwork City. As they say, these things, all the things you actually see of it to enter it, they're just the entrances to it. They're representations.
Right.
Yeah.
They're an avatar of it.
Truly as massive as anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because when you enter it, like through the thing, I mean, it shows you shrinking. And you go into it, and then when you're inside, you can see
starting to accept paradoxes where it's both that is a representation, but it's also the Clockwork City itself. Starting to accept those paradoxes, that kind of is a Sotha Sil thing. A lot of the throwaway dialogue in the Clockwork City is there's brain teasers and puzzles like that.
And it's also part of the structure of the Erebus, though, right? Because when you look up at the sky and see the different Adric planets, that's both the representation and the thing itself represented as something as a sphere, which is not the whole thing.
Well, speaking of skybox, speaking of skyboxes, I love the Clockwork City skybox with the
no, it's really good.
Gears the size of the sky.
That and the Psijic Order skybox was really fantastic too, but I couldn't for the life of me figure out what exactly was going on there.
Which one?
In the wherever it is, the Isle of Artaeum.
Yeah. Oh, I still don't know
with the
what that is.
streaks and lines in the sky.
Yeah, it's got these lines.
I do have a theory about that. I have theories.
That's not Sotha Sil. We do meet Sotha Sil, of course, in the Somerset DLC as well, and I don't think he's written by the same guy because he comes off as not as well written, and he says weird things like, "I haven't studied a seasload in an exceedingly long unit of temporal measurement." And there was a post I saw that was really funny. It's like, Sotha Sil literally just forgot the word for time at that point.
I haven't studied in what do you call them?
Redeeming his Con Air persona.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what's your theory? No? Oh, he's muted.
What?
Okay.
Sorry,
yep.
I thought Jonathan had something to say.
Did I? No.
Oh, well, okay. All right. Sorry.
I thought we had a theory about the skybox in the Isle of Artaeum, but...
Oh, no, that was...
Andrew, right.
Trying to think some more horrifying things to discuss about the Clock City. We talked about how nothing is organic there, so there's throwaway lines like they can't chop wood because it comes out as metal splinters and hurts you.
It's made out of steel.
The blades of grass are literally blades of grass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I freaking love. Well, I love the idea that they're blades of grass, but they're really brittle. Like you can run across somebody's lawn and they're like, "Do you have any idea how long that's going to take me to put back together again?" You know.
I like to think that the Clockwork City is like a giant GPU, and all the sand everywhere is the dust that Sotha Sil has forgotten to blow out.
Right.
Some more throwaway things. Of course, there is a Sotha Sil anime hug pillow that you can get as contraband.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Really not a lot of people in the Clockwork City. There's the census they take, and there's like about 300 to 400 people total in the Clockwork City. Not just,
very small.
Most of them are concentrated in the Brass Fortress.
Well, if they need to start... If they need to start sacrificing people to power things, then you're going to wind up with a shrinking population.
Well, people keep coming in. That's a good thing.
What about the eye?
See, you need immigrants.
Clockwork City is those weird mushrooms. Those are also made of metal. The only actual technically organic things are the fabricants.
There's the mushrooms, I think, that they find in caves.
I think those are artificial. They might be fabricant mushrooms. I'm trying to think. The best thing to find the things that are organic is to look through the quest line with the guy that wants to make food out of Clockwork City.
That's what it was. That's what I was thinking of. Yeah, he was trying to make food out of inorganic matter. Yeah.
What about the Eye of Magnus?
That's not in the Clockwork City.
Isn't it?
No. So there are...
Oh, no. Yeah. Sorry, Jonathan, go ahead.
Oh, I was just say there's all over the place in ESO. There's little balls that are identical to the Eye of Magnus.
Yeah, you see, I think we counted 4 of them on Artaeum,
Yeah, there's a bunch in the Sijic Tower.
Yeah, there's 2 of them are in Sotha Sil's study.
Yep.
And then I know there's a big one underneath Elden Root, which I don't know if they just had the asset and threw it in. And then if you look at like the way shrines in Clockwork City, they have the same kind of patterns in that kind of dome along the outside. Which led John and I to come up with the idea that the Eye of Magnus is actually a creation of Sotha Sil. Because what is it? MK, what words does he use to describe it?
You always said it was an ancient engine.
But is that a misinterpreted Dwemercraft? What does Sotha Sil base his designs on?
Dwemercraft.
Not anymore. They specifically say that he stopped making stuff in things.
Sure, yeah.
If you read the commit message from the Assembly General, the one of like 20 billion commit messages, it says, yeah, we've stopped making things in dwarven designs. Creator, please respond. Error 404.
Yeah, but then I mean we look at like the fight at Sarthal, where that they put Kinmune in the Eye of Magnus. That was in the first era. So
actually, I think that's a misconception. It's what they actually say about Kinmune is that she's actually way deeper, and she ends up in some dwarven ruins beneath Sarthal, where she learns to interpret the stuff and make herself a robot body. The Eye of Magnus being Kinmune is a misinterpretation of that entire thing. No, she's not the Eye of Magnus. It was that she ends up in like a dwarven like thingy and learns to understand it, and then escapes in a robot body.
Well, anyway, so Eye of Magnus, and then the connection with the sun. He's trying to create a fake sun. Maybe these other little eyes of Magnus that he seems to have built were some kind of like proof of concept. Hey, here's what this false sun could look like, and maybe that's why in the Skyrim quest line it gives off so much energy, and then Ancano is able to draw energy from it because it's got some semblance of divine energy thanks to Sunara. Maybe Sunara is actually the staff of Magnus.
All right, I think we're getting a little off topic.
I see Johnny said the same thing.
Yeah, Sorry, go ahead.
Well, we actually the Eye of the staff of Magnus is actually in ESO though.
Oh, that's right, it is, huh? Is it?
Sorry,
it is. Yeah, it's an artifact.
Sorry, quick question, TrainWiz. Were you about to say the Guy of Magnus? Because that would be a hilarious insert in some kind of...
The Magnus guy.
The Magnus guy.
I was imagining Magnus
the Magna guy.
Like cubes or something.
Yeah. I'm just for some reason or other, I'm seeing AC/DC in my head.
Yeah, I'm seeing... So someone was talking about...
He's all,
the mushrooms in Clockwork City. I'm going to look at this. I don't think the mushrooms were actually organic matter. They're iron stalk mushrooms, which kind of implies that they're artificial. I'm going to check just to make sure.
Well, while he's checking, Chris, on that note of AC/DC, that reminds me, I've finally started watching JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. And no one warned me that so many characters and villains had names of
like bands and stuff.
Bands and their albums. So it's really hard to take serious a villain named AC/DC.
Or Cars, for God's sake.
Yeah, Cars, Loggins and Messina.
Yeah, Loggins, yeah.
Lisa, like, oh my god.
Yeah.
Yeah, no one prepared me for JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, man. It's
well, the warning's on the name, dude.
yeah, I know.
On the name and the country of origin, really.
Yeah. Well, that's the very like first season of JoJo is like the ability that Joestar gets is called Hamon, which is a really bad Japanese pronunciation of the word harmony. So it's all supposed to be a very musical kind of, the idea of, or I think they translate it as ripple in some version. Yeah. And it's all supposed to be like this, a nod to music and sound and etc. But it doesn't help that everybody's named after a
music and sound. What is the cosmic significance of the fact that all the factotums in the Clockwork City, the factotum bards, cannot play music at all?
Yes, and the fact that you tortured me for weeks on ESO by going, "Fwee at me every chance you
Oh,
get.
it was the best. And if anyone's unaware of the origins, they did talk about this in Clockwork City sound design podcast, I guess.
Really?
It's that was just the sound test for the flutes and stuff.
Oh.
And they were really, really shitty, and they decided to just leave them in.
They're all
That's
really
amazing.
purposefully
Well,
bad
the other thing,
at
of
playing
course, is the
instruments.
Wraith of Crows, the sound designer said he just had his like children scream into the microphone and modulated it.
Yeah, of course.
How about this?
Oh, I wanna hear
Music
that.
requires a bit of Padomaicness, given that Jyggalag created music,
That's a good one.
and
Mhm.
it's incapable of happening in the Clockwork City.
And for those of you playing bingo at home, that's the interesting.
Yeah, there you go. Check that one off. Yeah, that's a good one. I personally just like the fact that I just enjoy the idea that the Fabricants are just shit at playing music. That's all.
It's the one thing he couldn't figure out how to make them do well.
Well, he can't be
they
arsed, and
do
it's way
try
too
to-
late in the development
I think
cycle to put that
that's a
patch
strategy,
in.
though,
So
he talks about how how Sotha Sil had a really lovely singing voice and stuff.
Mhm.
So his sister's robots can't play music anymore. That's like, no.
yeah,
Well, so they also try to write a poem, and that was amazing.
yeah, it
Although
was.
it's a poem.
There's brilliant
So maybe it's just
dialogue
like
in,
they
in
lack
that
artistic
expansion.
talent.
Sorry, hang on. Roses are red, violets are blue. Sotha Sil 2, Clockwork Boogaloo.
Oh, hey!
Yay.
But one thought I've just
Alright,
had on
bye,
that
everybody.
basis.
Going out
One
on a high
thought I
note.
just had on that the idea of music not being a thing in the Clockwork City, does that mean that Clockwork City is kind of doomed from the start, given that the Arabist is a song?
There is music in the Clockwork City. It just sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
It's just the ticking of a pendulum.
Hey,
Yeah,
man, you got a
by
rhythm.
metronome.
Hey, the
but
metronomes
like-
can keep. Actually, hold up. Is it a
Again,
metronome?
I really like the idea that I think it was James or Jonathan who was saying how it has to do with that you need some Padomaic ness or influence, like a little bit of seasoning on top, as it were, in order to generate music. And because Sotha Sil is so anuic, and that requires a kind of strict rigidity, whereas music can be in many ways free flowing and creative, it's beyond his realm of understanding in a way for these various reasons.
Yeah.
So in essence, it's because Sotha Sil is a STEM major.
Yes.
Mm.
Not necessarily. 'cause,
Band nerd.
You speak to you speak to people who go into music theory, and it's quite mathematical in how it stacks up.
Yeah.
I mean, and the Dwemer talking about tones and everything as well.
Mhm.
Their fundamental understanding was both music and maths.
Yeah.
So it's
And-
kind of
and-
weird that Sotha Sil doesn't connect the two in the same way.
Yeah, exactly. Tord has got it right. Yeah, Feynman, if you guys are interested in getting into really amazing philosophy and just brain candy, start reading Richard Feynman. Anything written by Richard Feynman is gold. And he wrote some very interesting, I guess, essays or so on about the theory of music and how it applies to mathematics. As a matter of fact, what is it? Gödel, Escher, Bach is also a really good book that people should read more of, that not enough people have read a lot of. By the way, I have the love poem, LT0782. Your merits defy calculation. My heart, metaphorical, pumps like a piston, and my pelvic and or knee brackets oscillate whenever we make physical contact. Also, your face symmetry pleases me.
Okay, so
Yeah, you can mail your
not
panties
gonna
to
lie,
Chris Nelson
for
and Atlanta,
Valentine's Day,
Georgia.
I deadass nearly put that down in the card that I was gonna give to the girl I've been seeing.
Oh, yeah.
I was very tempted because you said, "Look, I'm not really a big Valentine's person," and I thought this would be a really funny, ironic joke.
hmm But is
So
it
I
working for you?
nearly went there, but I said, you know what? Next year, though. Next year.
I'll do that for my wife just because.
hmm
Just see how she reacts.
I'm just going through Contraband right now. it's kind of hard. It's a shame we can't sort contraband on the UESP by expansion.
Oh, that'd be nice.
Trying to sort these things out, but there are some interesting bits here. Let's see. Obviously, there's the Sotha Sil anime hug pillow. There's a fair amount of Sotha Sil action figures and stuff. And there's also we've got a Fabricant stuffed teddy bear made from grafted leather Fabricant skin. There's Fabricant blood. Yeah, a novice apostle tried to synthesize blood. And actually, the concept of synthetic stuff in the Clockwork City is interesting because we have the paste. As everyone knows, everyone in Sotha Sil eats nothing but paste.
Yeah.
It's flavorless.
Which is apparently, it's flavorless, but apparently is enough to keep them healthy and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that Magnus, the sun, isn't necessary for like sustaining life, it's necessary for flavor.
Yeah.
And we're back to music again. Or the idea of music.
Mouth music.
I loved that album.
There you go, music.
It counts. Synesthesia, exactly, Doc. I mean, that's really kind of what we're getting at here. That's where tonal architecture came from, so, yeah.
Some more interesting facts in the Clockwork City. If you've ever done the fishing achievement, which is, I finally got that like a few months ago.
That's a lot of work.
Proud of it.
Yeah.
It is a lot of work because there's only one type of fishing spot, so it's a lot of RNG.
Yeah.
But a lot of the fish in the Clockwork City aren't necessarily fabricated fish; they're extinct fish.
Huh?
They're rare and extinct fish. A lot of the so Clockwork City angler. Let me look that up. So you do find things like imperfect blob fins or like clockwork rays or something, but you do also find a lot of things like fabricant fish. There is the rare fish. It is an N megalabzu. It's some sort of anglerfish looking thing. And it's a rare fish found only in the oily waters of Clockwork City, presumed extinct. We have an ancestor wrasse, which is another rare fish. So there's a lot of clockwork fish, but there's a lot of extinct fish too. So the question is like, why is Sotha Sil taking these rare creatures and preserving them?
Because he likes to preserve things. I mean, that's sort of his
because
thing.
Memory.
Because he's a fucking nerd.
He has an entire museum dedicated to his personal memories.
True.
Like,
Yeah.
that's his thing.
Well, I also thought, didn't he at one point or another say that he did actually try to get stuff to live in the Clockwork City?
No.
Wasn't that something that he gave a shot at some point?
He assigned another guy to try and do that.
Oh, that's what it was. Yeah, he delegated.
He delegated. And then he went, here, I'll help you, and then never helped him. And the guy got upset and started making food out of people.
Too real.
Sotha Sil, a lot of Sotha Sil's characterizations of dungeons and areas and stuff is, here's this thing, I wash my hands of it, I kind of forget that the experiment exists.
Yep.
I mean, it's like I said, it's very out of character for him. Like everyone knows the origin of the Skivatrons, right? Why they're everywhere.
The what?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So the backstory of the Skivatrons is someone left one of the fabricators on overnight and it created like 1 billion of them. So they made clockwork cats, and there were 1 billion clockwork cats, so they made clockwork dogs, and so on and so on. And they had clockwork bears and tigers. And then Sotha Sil emerged from the basement, said, dude, what the fuck? And got rid of all of them except for the Skivatrons, which he kept as a joke.
Yeah. He walked out with his piece of pizza and was like, what the fuck?
That's a bizarre joke.
Which probably means like they were so bad that like he looked up at like the giant spatial central mainframe of Sotha Sil. It's like a cat like resting on one of the gears, and he's like, why is there a cat?
Yeah.
Actually,
let that in.
It's impressive that it was so bad it actually got his attention.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of lack of attention, I initially kind of thought through what on earth it means, and kind of thinking about who the Clockwork Apostles are and the way, and Sotha Sil kind of collecting them. It feels a bit like an R&D department for Tamriel. He's just kind of collecting the best minds and then just throwing them together and seeing what happens, which is a very random thing to do.
It's not that random. That was literally how Google started. They literally just went out and hired the smartest people they knew and put them in a room.
Yeah, but it's saying that I don't know what these people are going to produce, but let's get them in one place and produce.
It's a misconception that a lot of the people in the Clockwork City are necessarily outsiders. A lot of the people in the Clockwork City that you talk to were born there.
Yeah.
You talk to a lot of the merchants, a lot of the forgesmiths and stuff. It's like, yeah, my parents were apostles, so I'm an apostle. So there is. Let's not think about how massively inbred the Clockwork City probably is. That's probably why he abducts people. But at the same time, it's like there is a lot of, they are kind of their own civilization unto themselves.
True.
Yeah.
And I mean, with his precise calculation, I mean, it might seem random to you and I or that other guy, but he could get like, I'm gonna steal that guy who's an idiot and that chick who's not, and in 5 generations they'll produce a genius who will go on
like
to make
I said,
this
Sotha Sil knows when things are going to happen.
Yeah.
Ooh, It's why he abducted Luciana. But like I said, what's her face? The woman, I can't actually remember her name. The Clockwork Apostle, she's one of the other heads and she wants to see birds. She was born in the Clockwork City.
Yeah.
And that's, like I said, the Clockwork City's main storyline to me is really interesting because it's not really about Sotha Sil. It's more like the people reacting to Sotha Sil. And it's like, I'd say Luciana is more the main character there than Sotha Sil. And sorry, I cannot remember.
Well, she's definitely
That's one of the things I really like about it. Like,
she's
the DLC about Sotha Sil, but it's still not actually about him.
And of course, at the end, there's that interesting foil where we have Luciana, her faith in Sotha Sil is rebuilt, and then Bird Girl, I'm just going to call her Bird Girl now.
Probably not her name, but that's all right.
Sotha Sil is really shattered because she never gets to meet him.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's, I mean, a lot of these characters are supposed to be our frame of reference, like the human frame of reference. If it was literally about Sotha Sil, it would just be a very strange DLC with a lot of very odd, unapproachable dialogue, and awesome, but
like the end.
Yeah.
Well, this is one of the things I do want to touch on. And I think, Jonathan, it might have been you who brought this to my attention when the DLC was first released, however many moons ago it was. It's not just about Sotha Sil. It's also, I mean, it is an excuse to show off him and Clockwork City and delve more into his aspect, which was always the most foreign to us because of his mystery. But it's also really interesting to see his thoughts and perspectives on Vivek that he says.
Oh yeah.
So that is I mean, I only asked for a steak, but you gave me filet mignon. Thank you very much. Right?
I really like the line where he's talking about Vivek wanting to basically Amaranth, and your response is being a god not enough, and then Sotha Sil's only line is no.
Yeah.
he says not even remotely.
Yeah, not even remotely.
Yeah, because you can see the next level up, and you want that. Or the next level down, I guess.
On Sotha Sil Contraband, we have a Sotha Sil playset. This brass figurine of the living god tinkers with a squirming mechanical animal via simple hand-operated mechanisms. And Sotha Sil's notes, with its nearly indecipherable writing, this is thought to be one of the hundreds of notes Sotha Sil creates on any given day.
They're just post-its that he leaves lying around. They don't make any sense at all.
Maybe it's just a mnemonic device. He writes it down so he doesn't forget, and then he puts it in the mnemonic planisphere.
And here we go, the stuffed set effigy. This adorable and slightly blasphemous depiction of Sotha Sil was once a pillow that now has mechanical bits stitched into it.
It's sharp.
And I gotta tell you, every time I found this piece of contraband when doing the Clockwork City's dailies, it's always been next to that merchant who gushes about how handsome Sotha Sil is.
Quick question, boys. Do those mechanical parts move and vibrate? Pray tell.
These are Clockwork Apostles. Everything they have moves in some capacity.
Awesome.
Assume unless
only
stated
with
otherwise
enough
it does.
oil.
That's called lube.
Yeah.
The sixth house is back. That's right, Doc.
Vampiric experiment log. The dates and times of rather grisly-sounding vampire-related experiments performed by the Clockwork Apostles. That must suck. You're like a vampire lord. You teleport into Clockwork City accidentally, and something like a bunch of people with robot arms just strap you down and dissect you. And you're like, but I can use magic. And
yeah,
like,
I'm finally
so
in a place
can
where
you.
I'm not getting burnt by the sunlight all the fucking time. And tough luck.
I can use magic. I can use a drill.
Yeah.
I can use magic. That's nice. We have guns.
Yeah.
That's my theory of what how Sotha Sil made the pact go down. It's like, what do you have to offer us to keep us from chastising Nern? And he just pulls out a Glock.
Yeah.
A nuke. I have this giant robot who shoots lasers out of his face.
Yeah.
Come at me.
Yes, but I have a 6R, so
obviously the old theories that everyone had is that the imperfect was basically Sotha Sil's excised imperfections. Here now, what we have now is that the imperfect is kind of a reflection of the Clockwork City. It's every time you kill it, it rebuilds itself with modifications based on how you killed it. So it's trying to achieve perfection, but obviously since we keep killing it, it never actually achieves that. So it's constantly trying.
Which is why by the time the third era rolls around, it has an actual face.
Yeah.
Well, it's not just got an actual face. Unfortunately, I'm kind of a little mad at the Clockwork TES Legends retconned it a bit, because in Morrowind, the imperfect design was like borderline fleshy and organic and robot, and it was hard to tell where like the robotic parts ended. But in Legends, it looks more like the Clockwork City ESO imperfect with just more facial features.
Well,
so obviously after getting killed by billions of adventurers, its conclusion was, I need to have a face.
That's the lesson it learned. Well, it's iterating, dude. It's trying shit out, you know? It's well, I mean,
it's like those machine learning simulations of how it walks and stuff. Like how it figures out the best ideal walking is like the weird like gait and stuff. It's like this is what it figured out.
This weird sort of loping thing. It's like, yep, that'll work. That'll work. I can get places with this. Yep. Well, that's what happens when you let machines teach themselves. Yep. So I think we're winding down, but I really, really want to do this before we forget. While we've got 23 people watching roughly, I really want to talk to everybody on this channel and evangelize for a little bit. TrainWiz has a game. That's literally should be the only thing I have to say to get you guys excited. It's called Underspace.
Yes, it is an open world space fantasy game.
Yes.
A lot of stuff actually came from, I was doing some TES space sim stuff and never ended up happening, and a lot of it ended up in Underspace.
Yeah. So
if you think cargo container mimics, giant space snakes, giant bioluminescent space deer, sentient religious suns, that's the kind of stuff we get.
Yeah, giant floating space lighthouses, which is still my favorite visual in the game.
Oh yeah, the lighthouses are fun. We've got space fishing ships, so we're hopefully releasing that this year.
Oh, that's this year. Okay, great.
That's what we're shooting for. We're moving more into content now.
It will be available on Steam, apparently. It's
Steam. We're looking into Good Old Games, but Good Old Games, they can reject things a lot.
Oh yeah, true. Well, they have a limit for what they're. I mean, I don't know how Good Old Games makes money. I've seen that. I'm looking at their business and I'm like, where's the profit margin at?
Yeah, it's, like I said, it's called Underspace. I'll even type it in the chat. Okay.
I just added it to my wish list.
Throw it. Yeah, there you go. Throw it. It's
single player, multiplayer. It's an RPG.
Oh, it has multiplayer too.
Yeah, it has. I told you, it has single player and multiplayer with campaigns for each.
Jesus, dude!
Wow.
All right. Shit. I didn't know that. I was already impressed. It's. Can you still buy into it on Kickstarter?
No, since the Kickstarter is done, you can't buy it onto Kickstarter. But the Kickstarter price and the Steam price, I'm pretty sure, are the same price. It's $20 to get the game.
Great. I was just wondering if people could still get into the closed beta.
Sapient suns, ancient space whaling ships.
The very first picture is a lizard flying through space.
Yeah.
I'm sold.
It's
yeah, that is. We have a demo you can try out right now, and on March 8th we'll be releasing a new edition of that demo. But the demo that you can try out now does in fact have that space snake. You can fight it and it will kick your ass. It's actually a pretty fun boss.
I mean, I was already sold when Chris said TrainWiz has a game.
Yeah,
So,
I literally
cool,
that should be the only thing I'd have to say. And yeah, I've got if anybody's played Free Space, no, Freelancer. It's going to remind you a little bit of Freelancer. It's
a little bit.
Yeah,
wink, wink.
That's an unbelievably positive thing. That Freelancer was phenomenal. This game looks really, really good. I'm legitimately excited. I'm not just saying this because it's TrainWiz. I'm actually legit. If it wasn't TrainWiz, I'd still want it. It looks really good.
Yep.
So,
like I said, we've started off as a cash grab, but I put a lot of work into it.
Yeah. How many people do you have working on it?
We have me as the main programmer and designer. We've got an organic artist who did things like the mimics. We've got an artist who does the ships, UI artist, musician, Foley artist, and then we'll have to get voice actors near the end and do all the space chatter because nobody likes my brother doing a gay Appalachian impression for the.
Okay.
People hate that, and I don't like that. It's like, but it is for people who hate that. A, you have bad taste, but B, don't worry. It's a placeholder. Only one of the races is actually going to sound like that.
All right.
Well, if you need voices, hit me up. I'll throw something together.
I'm sure the entire modding community would be more than happy to volunteer. So
also, I actually have voice acting experience, so if you need something, I offer. Yeah.
And
like I said, we'll be reaching out for voice actors closer to the end once the
awesome.
Everything is fitting because putting voices in is actually one of the easier parts of the game.
Yeah, and it's also one of the last things you do generally.
Yep, yeah, that is true.
So I'm gonna put a link up to that in like every description I have access to. So I really, really want to get people on this. It looks fantastic. In the meantime, thanks everybody for tuning in. Have we decided what we're doing next?
There was something to moot about postmodernism and unreliable narrator and
That's
such.
right.
But
we may be starting over from the beginning again.
Doing like more Etata and other gods like Finaster and stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Actually, have you guys covered the Sigics at all? Because with
no.
Somerset out
Thank
there. Thank a lot
you.
more to talk about.
That's a great idea. Yeah, we should absolutely cover that.
Talk about the 11 forces and stuff like that.
The Sigic Endeavor.
Oh.
Okay.
Yep.
So everybody who's got a camera, wave goodbye.
Bye.
Everybody.
I'm waving.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.